Now, busy old day in the Sunday papers, and there on cue are the imps on the front of the Sunday Times there. Their main story is about an Islamist plot, they say, to take over a state school in Burnley. But a very interesting story here by some guy called Tim Shipman about raiding the foreign aid budget to help Brexit by paying Eastern European companies for their goodwill. The Mail on Sunday story there. You may thought the Edward Heath story had gone away. Heath was a paedophile, is its main story, and a lot of detail inside about that, but it's from a police officer, and he's not quoted directly, so we'll talk about that again. The Observer is leading on chaos looming for EU citizens who hope to stay in Britain. A very, very live story in both houses of Parliament at the moment. We'll be talking about that later on, I'm sure. The Sunday Telegraph there has a story about a Putin or a Kremlin conspiracy to assassinate the leader of Montenegro. Now, this has been around before, but as you read into it, it's still pretty gory stuff. And then finally, all the pops being poppy. That's all I need to say about that for the time being. Oh no, we're going to talk about the Express, certainly. My mummy is drunk, please read to me. And this is the kind of calls that they're getting on helplines from people whose parents are so drunk they can't read them bedtime stories. Very, very sad story. But we're going to start off, I think, with the Edward Heath story. Tim Shipman, you're an expert on all things parliamentary and political, he said firmly. Is there anything in this story, do you think?
Well, there would appear to be. I mean, we thought this story had gone away. One of the people who was accusing Edward Heath of wrongdoing has since been exposed as a fantasist. And as a result of that, everybody thought that all the allegations had gone away. Sure. What this story says is that the police officer in Wiltshire who's been investigating this claims there are 30 witnesses who are providing, evidence that rings true. They're saying the same kind of things in different parts of the country, and he's got a report coming in June, and it's clear that it's going to show that...
to accuse our former Prime Minister of being a paedophile.
It's pretty serious.
He says moment.
He's 120% sure that there's something in it. Well, let's hope his investigation is better than his knowledge of percentages.
Well, long before that, of course, we have the by-election this week, 2 by-elections this week in Copeland and Stoke-on-Trent. And depending on which paper you read, Caroline Flint, you get different predictions about what's going to happen. You, not surprisingly, have chosen the Observer, which thinks that you're going to see off UKIP in Stoke-on-Trent.
Yes, the Observer story is, I think, reflecting some of what I heard on Friday when I was campaigning in Stoke, is that the tall tales or the dodgy tales around Paul Nuttall's past is causing some concern amongst voters there. I think they want straight-talking politicians. They don't want necessarily a Walter Mitty character, but it is a hard-fought campaign, undoubtedly.
It's very hard.
But I think Labour's spirits are much more buoyant than they were a few weeks ago, because obviously the Paul Nuttall damaging his own campaign has probably, in the public's mind, questioned his candidacy.
Both of you, the Labour Party and UKIP, you both kind of need to win this campaign. Nigel Farage, your former party leader, Douglas Carswell, has said it is fundamental to UKIP to win Stoke-on-Trent. It's a big one for you.
It's important. I mean, it could turn out to be a bit like the Spen Valley by-election in 1919, when an established old party was finally seen off and defeated by the new insurgents. The only difference being that Labour is no longer the insurgent party, it's the old established party. If we win this, like that by-election almost 100 years ago, it could mark the turning point at which Labour is displaced. And if it did, that would be wonderful.
And you've been down there, and clearly Paul Nuttall has some trouble down there. What's your feeling about the atmosphere on the streets?
Well, I think the Sun article by Ben Griffiths gets it about right. We're still the underdog, and we're up against a party that's been running Stoke since 1950. But they had a 20,000 majority in that constituency in the late 1990s. It's pretty thin now. You only need about 8,000 or 9,000 votes to win the by-election, I think, and I think we could just about do it. We'll know soon enough.
Just about. I've been very cautious there. Caroline Flint, you've said that you thought that Tony Blair's intervention on Brexit and all of that was badly timed for the by-election. Why was that?
Well, I don't think it's going to affect the by-election whether Tony made his speech this week or affect things more generally next week. I think, look, the issue isn't about whether Tony Blair should offer a comment. I think he's completely entitled to do so. I think it's whether his advice about running a 2-year campaign to try and overturn the referendum is the right way forward. I don't believe that is. I think we have to accept the result and try and get the best deal we can.
No matter what happens. I mean, no matter what happens to the economy.
Look, Tony knows that in the next 2 years, where we're going to get to is really the headlines of what the exiting agreement's going to be. It could be 5, 6, 7, 8 years beyond that, a transition period, as the Prime Minister said, when we really know the details of what's going to happen. In the meantime, there's lots to argue for, there's lots to campaign for, and one of the things is obviously the government could do is sort out this EU national issue.
Well, certainly the cartoonist Tim Shipman in the Sunday Telegraph agrees with Caroline Flint. This was not great timing.
No, I mean, it's an amusing image of voters in despair at the fact that Mr Blair is back. You wonder whether Mr Blair wants to win these by-elections. For his wing of the party, it might be better to lose both of them.
You think?
Blair's intervention also, if I may say, plays straight into the UKIP message in Stoke, where we're saying that if you vote Labour, you're voting for a party that wants to subvert the referendum. And in a city that voted overwhelmingly to leave, I think Comrade Blair is
Douglas,
helping.
Part of the problem is that, you know, things were said on both sides in the referendum campaign that were overblown. But I have to say some of the worst things that were said about £350 million and all of this hasn't helped us. We need to get to pace to bring Leave and Remain voters together to get the best deal. And that's what's most important.
Tim, your newspaper, the Sunday Times, sent reporters down to both by-elections. Cautious there, but you also think that Stoke is certainly very much on a knife edge.
I think so. There's a very fetching picture here of Douglas as well, with
one
one of my colleagues, Camilla Long.
I can't think.
I mean, the people I speak to think that Stoke is a toss-up, that Labour probably are just edging it there at the moment, but that the Copeland by-election is looking very good for the Conservative Party, and Labour has hemorrhaged about a third of its vote from 2015 there.
And there's a big story on that. There's also a story on the same page, the bottom of the page, that's your story. And explain to us, you have come across, I think, 6 Labour peers who are thinking of giving up the Labour whip in the House of Lords and becoming crossbenchers as part of their move towards the Lib Dems to maximise the anti-Brexit vote.
Yeah, and they appear to have been, some of them, speaking to the Conservative Party as well. There's not a mood to do direct defections and cause huge amounts of trouble. Everyone will get very exercised. Is there going to be a leadership challenge against Jeremy Corbyn? What's going to happen next in the party? This is just evidence of people just gently pulling back and saying, we no longer want to take the Labour whip. They're quite happy to have the Lib Dems put their whipping card in their pigeonholes, and sort of unofficial alignments are going to develop. And I'm sure when you speak to Peter Mandelson, you'll be interested to know about this realignment that's going on at the moment.
Strictly between ourselves, Tim, because nobody is watching, certainly not Peter Mandelson. Is he one of the 6?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge.
Maybe it's 7, Andrew.
Maybe it's 7. Well, that'd be the story. OK, so let's move on to the next story, which I think is going to be... what we're going to go, Douglas Carswell, business rates. Yes, we had that guy on the news, you'll have heard just now, saying this is a real crisis for shops and pubs and restaurants.
I think the business rate story actually has the potential to really clobber the government, because although most businesses will not be any worse off, about a quarter will. And, you know, if you're running a business and your business rates go up by, 100 and something %, you're going to squeak pretty loudly. Perhaps what we're seeing here in a way is that this government, this Conservative government, grappling with the legacy of John Major's government. He not only signed up to the Maastricht Treaty, and look at the consequences of that, led to Brexit, but his decision to nationalise the business rates, finally that decision is catching up with the government. You can't, I think, ultimately carry on running a system. We need a whole new system of business rates. You
would think that with a government that says it's there for the just about managing people and are worried about the high streets, this is not a fight they can afford to have. Tim, there was sort of suggestions that the government are going to row back and try and moderate or soften the business rate
Well, I
rises.
think what they're saying is they're absolutely committed to the revaluation, and they're not going to give ground on the general principle, but clearly there's a budget coming up, and if something can be done to stop the worst cliff edge effects of this, then the Chancellor will probably have to listen, but he's not got a lot of money to play with.
Now, sometimes people say that MPs don't do enough campaigning and don't have issues. You have chosen a particular issue which is now on the front of the Sunday Express, Caroline Flint. Just tell us about it.
Yes, as you said earlier, the Sunday Express front page story is about the story of a little girl ringing up a helpline saying, "My mummy is drunk, please read to me." And the people at the end of the helpline, this is the National Association of Children of Alcoholics, actually read her a bedtime story while her parents were drunk in another room. Myself and other MPs, Liam Byrne, but across party, we've launched a manifesto for children of alcoholics because it has been overlooked for many years. Often there's adult services that help the adults who've got addiction problems, but there isn't anything for the children. And myself and Liam and others, part of the reason we are talking about this is that we're children of alcoholics as well.
So, and presumably there's no way of knowing how many kids are there.
Well, there's something like, we reckon, about 1 in 5 children. That's about 2.5 million children affected by this. And often, and I know it's the case for myself and others who've been in this situation, it's the secrecy and the shame that prevents this being heard. And children who live with alcoholics are something like twice as many are likely to have struggle at school, 3 times as many as others are likely to consider suicide, and 4 times more likely to become alcoholics themselves. It's a much overlooked area.
Is this something that blighted your own life, do you think?
It did. I think, you know, the secrecy and shame of it, it took me many, many years and to even be able to talk about this, because obviously, you know, with parents like this, you can love them and hate them in the same day, and it's very difficult. And certainly for me,
well, good
going to university was trying to find a new way of life and get away from it. But I'm pleased that this is covered by the Sunday Express. I hope more of the media will pick it up, and I hope we'll get something done.
Well, good for you for speaking out.
Thank you.
Tim Shipman, the story about the Russians plotting to assassinate the leader of Montenegro. Montenegro, a tiny little country with a lot of Russian exiles, a lot of Russian oligarchs who've got money in Montenegro. Sunny, small Balkan country. What more do we know about this story?
Well, it's just an extraordinary thing that, you know, on our doorstep, this kind of thing is going on. And I think if you juxtapose that story with this picture of the North Korean chap who's basically been assassinated in an airport, we talk a lot in this country about, you know, the tensions of Brexit. It seems at times that we've never been so divided, but actually we're living in a world where the Russians are trying to assassinate people in Europe. Elsewhere in the world, people are going around killing people in airports, and I think we've probably got a lot to be grateful for actually in this country, that these things are front page news because they're extraordinary.
Sound thought. Douglas Carswell, you were mentioning business rates just now. You've got another economic story there, the basic income.
This is an idea that's becoming terribly fashionable, and everyone says it's a new idea. Actually, it was tried a couple of thousand years ago.
Sorry, just before we get there, instead of getting the complicated welfare system, the idea is simply everybody gets paid the same amount of basic money.
Every citizen gets paid
whether you work or
an
don't
allowance,
work. Or,
whether you work or not. And it's put forward as a new idea, a solution to the problem.
It is very
of automation.
trendy at the moment, yes.
But you know, it's not a new idea. It was tried by the Romans. Gaius Gracchus tried it 2,000 something years ago, and it was the basis.
Like an erudite paper review.
The Roman corn dole, and it was a disaster. It led to Rome sort of parasiting off the provinces. Behind the basic income will be the idea that we parasite off posterity. We borrow from future generations so that people don't need to work today. It's not a very sensible idea.
Well, no one can say that we haven't covered a lot of stories today. Thank you all very much indeed.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.